Hello chess fans, this is Rick from Chess2Progress with number 15 in the series Viewers Games. This one is from Andre and he says, Dear Rick, below are the PGNs. PGN stands for Portable Game Notation. From my two recent games, these are Chess.com Live Blitz games, 10 minutes, no increment. I realize that you now probably receive tons of requests to analyze games. If you find time to analyze this, I would greatly appreciate it. I'm not posting the nicknames of opponents out of respect. I changed their names to Player 1 and Player 2. Thank you, you are doing a great job with your YouTube channels. Andre. Okay, let's have a look at Andre's game against Player 1. Andre is white and his opponent is black. E4, E5, Knight F3, Knight C6, Knight C3, A6, Bishop C4, H6. Some players always play A6 and H6 or A3 and H3. And although this is often quite reasonable, it's also a bit of a lazy and passive approach, always wanting to play those two moves on the side of the board. It's not always necessary. Andrew castled, Knight F6, Rook E1, D6 and A3. The idea of A3 is to give the bishop a square on A2 in case of, for example, Knight A5 chasing that bishop. Bishop G4 and H3. Now Andrew also has played those two little moves A3 and H3, but there was a bit more thought behind it than black's A6 and H6. This move H3 now asks the bishop a question and Andrew's opponent decides to take on F3. Queen takes back, Bishop E7, D3, Queen D7 and Bishop E3. So far, both players have played really well, developing moves, putting their pieces into play. But here, black makes a mistake. Castling kingside makes perfect sense, but black decided to castle queenside. That's why he played Queen D7 on the previous move. And he completely overlooked that he's just losing a pawn. Bishop takes F7 is a pawn for nothing. And here is an interesting moment, psychologically interesting moment. Black now played an active move, Knight D4, and I suspect that it must have been a reaction to annoyance of dropping that pawn on F7. And often we see that a bad move is followed by a worse one. So that's a lesson learned from this game. If you make a bad move, if you make a mistake, take it on the chin, sit on your hands, don't immediately make a move out of anger or out of frustration. Try to come to terms with the disappointment of the mistake and regroup, start again and look for the best move in the position. I suspect that in this case black lashed out Knight D4, which is not a good move. Bishop takes D4, E takes D4, and here Andrew could have gained a big advantage with Knight E2. White is much better. The d-pawn is hanging. If you play c5, then there is Knight f4. And that knight keeps an eye on that very nice square on d5. There are also maneuvers of Bishop g6, threatening Bishop f5, where the queen and king are skewered. Overall, white is much better here. Andrew played Knight d5. Not a bad move, but Knight e2 was stronger. Black took on d5, bishop takes d5 and c6. Bishop is attacked, went to c4, and now black made a tactical mistake. He played d5, which looks logical, but he missed a detail at the end of the variation. This can happen, of course, in 10-minute games. Let's see, you may want to put the video on hold and see why d5 is not a good move. What is the refutation of d5? It's not very difficult. What Andrew played, he found a refutation. He took on d5, and after c takes d5, he took with the bishop. It doesn't look possible because that bishop is now attacked twice by queen and rook and only defended by the queen. But we'll see what happens. Queen takes d5, queen takes d5, rook takes d5, and now we see what black had overseen is that the bishop on e7 is now unprotected. So white wins his piece back straight away. Rook takes e7 and is now 2 pawns up in a rook endgame. g5, rook ae1, rook d7, rook e8 check, rook takes, and here of course you have to play king c7. White is of course completely winning, for example rook e6, h5, rook e5, and this is simply a winning rook endgame for white. But instead of king c7, the black player played rook d8, and that made it even easier for Andrew to win the game. Andrew swapped on d8, king takes back, and after king f1, player 1, the black player, resigned. And that's another lesson learned. Don't swap pieces when you're lost. Swapping pawns is good, because if you can swap enough pawns, you might end up in a situation where you are still material down, but white may not have enough material to win the game. For example, what springs to mind is the endgame of rook and bishop versus rook and no pawns left, or rook and knight versus rook, which is even closer to a draw. So that's an important thing to remember. When you're material behind, it is good to swap pawns, but it's not good to swap pieces. In this case, the black player just let both rooks being swapped, and that makes this pawn endgame a very easy win for white. Let's give one possible variation just to show. King d7, king e2, king e6, king f3, both white and black centralize their kings, king e5, then g4, taking the f5 square away from the black king, king d5, king g3 to get out of the way of the f-pawn, b5, f4, and I'll stop the variation here. It's so easy. White is just going to make a passed pawn on the king side. The black king will have to defend that, which will give white the space and time to pick up the d-pawn, and then he will win with his majority on the queen side, while black first has to pick up that passed pawn on the king side. You can play it out for yourself, it's very easy. So again, don't swap pieces when you're lost. Swapping pawns is good. And as we said earlier, after making a mistake, make sure you don't make an emotional, active move, which may be an even bigger mistake. Hope these 2 pointers from this game will be useful for you in your own games. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up, please subscribe to the Chess2 Progress channel, and I'm looking forward to your comments. And if you liked the video, I would be very grateful if you could share it on YouTube. You also may want to check out my Chess2 Impress channel. The link is in the description box. This is Rick from Chess2 Progress. Thank you very much for watching.